and Israel-Palestine. I'm Steve Shalom from Jewish Voice for Peace of Northern New Jersey, the sponsor of this event. Some of you may know that the Israeli authorities have recently accused 6 Palestinian non-governmental organizations, NGOs, of terrorism. These NGOs, however, were not the first to be so accused. The United States government did the same to an American organization, the Holy Land Foundation for Relief and Development, in 2001. The Holy Land Foundation was the largest Muslim charity in the United States, and the Palestinian charities it funded were supported by the US government. Nevertheless, its leaders were charged with providing material support for terrorism and ultimately sentenced to up to 65 years in prison. How did this happen? This case is of importance and concern in its own right, but it's significant as well for what it tells us about civil liberties in the United States and the struggle for justice for Palestinians living under Israeli rule. To learn more about this case, we have brought together a well-informed group of speakers. Zia Joffrey, an author and writing faculty at the New School who has been researching a book on the case. John Bryant, a former Democratic representative from Texas who was a witness in the case. And Asma Elashi, the daughter of one of the imprisoned founders of the Holy Land Foundation. The sponsor of this evening's event is the North Jersey chapter of Jewish Voice for Peace, a national grassroots organization inspired by Jewish tradition to work for a just and lasting peace according to principles of human rights, equality, and international law for all the people of Israel and Palestine. We are so pleased to acknowledge all the co-sponsors of this event. In fact, there are so many of them that I'm not going to read out their names, but I'm just going to share the screen and show you the list of the co-sponsors. Our plan is as follows. First, we will hear from each of our speakers. Then we will open it up to questions from the audience. You'll just type your questions in the chat and we will try to get to as many as possible. And finally, we will leave you with a few suggestions of things you can do if you feel so moved by what you've heard this evening. Our first speaker is Zia Joffrey. Zia Joffrey is writing a book about the Holy Land Foundation case. She's the author of The Invisibles, a tale of the eunuchs of India, about the trans community there, known as the Hijras. She has written cover stories, features, and book reviews for many publications, including the New York Times Book Review, The Nation, Salon, The Progressive, Mother Jones, The Washington Post, and Elle, where she was a contributing editor. She has covered South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission hearings and the AIDS pandemic. She reported on the Second Intifada for Vogue magazine, traveling to the West Bank and Gaza with Doctors Without Borders. Her work has been anthologized in several volumes, most recently in Toni Morrison, The Last Interview and Other Conversations. She is core faculty in the New School's MFA program. It is my pleasure to present Zia Joffrey.
Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you so much, Steve and JVP Northern New Jersey, for this opportunity to tell you a little bit more about the Holy Land Foundation case. I'm just going to amplify a little bit of what Steve said, which was that 6 organizations in Israel were recently declared terrorist groups. They are Al-Haq, Bizan Center, Adamir, Defense of Children International, and they are very prominent organizations. And the reason that they were targeted basically by the government of Israel is because they were so influential and they were changing, they were working with European governments. Some of them were working with the US Congress to bring attention to the human rights abuses in the occupied territories. So I want to give you just a little bit of a flavor of that. Defense Minister Benny Gantz said, these groups were operating under the guise of civil service organizations, but in practice belong to and form an arm of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, whose goal is to destroy Israel. And there are other reasons why they were targeted. They were working with the international, ICC, and looking into the abuses of when Gaza was bombarded in 2014. So there's a history of this. There's also a history of going after charitable groups in general. Sahar Francis of Adamir, which is one of the groups that was targeted, basically said that she believed that Israel had been going for the last decade quietly to governments in Europe and asking them to defund Palestinian NGOs. So there's a history of this going back to World Vision, for example, the case of Halabi, which that poor man has suffered. He's lost half his hearing. He was accused of funneling money to Hamas. The Islamic Relief Agency has been investigated over and over again. And of course, there's been an effort to defund the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, and which has been somewhat restored under Biden, but not completely. So to go back to 2001, the language used to delegitimize and to criminalize the Holy Land Foundation bears listening to. So on December 4th, 2001, President Bush at the time was surrounded in the Rose Garden with Treasury Secretary on one side and Attorney General Ashcroft on the other. And he announced that they had seized the assets and records of the Holy Land Foundation, closed their offices, and declared the Holy Land Foundation a specially designated terrorist and a specially designated global terrorist. They were considered by him a front for Hamas. And he said, the money raised by the Holy Land Foundation is, quote, used by Hamas to support schools and indoctrinate children to grow up into suicide bombers, to recruit suicide bombers, and to support their families. And Paul O'Neill said, the Holy Land Foundation masquerades as a charity while its primary purpose is to fund Hamas. Innocent donors who thought that they were helping someone in need deserve protection from these scam artists who prey on their benevolence. So this is the kind of rhetoric that was attached to, at the time, and really the real reason that they were targeted is because they were, as you said, Steve, the major American Muslim charitable foundation in this country. They were successful. They were internationally well known, and they worked in Gaza and the West Bank, in Lebanon with the refugee camps, and in Jordan, as well as everywhere else. They worked in Turkey, so I just want to give you a sense of what they did. I'm sorry, I might be looking down and it might not be that great, but forgive me. All right. They worked alongside NATO. They worked with many UN agencies. They worked with, for example, the World Food Program. They worked with the Red Cross, and they worked with the Royal Dutch Army, Catholic Charities, Samaritan's Purse, the Wheelchair Foundation, the Salvation Army, the Red Crescent, that's just to name a few. And here are some examples of the kind of work that they did. Orphan sponsorships, family sponsorships, bringing mobile X-ray units to Turkey after an earthquake. They brought wheelchairs, 700 wheelchairs to Gaza during the Second Intifada, but not just that, they provided physical and occupational therapists for the people who, both children and adults, who had never really been in a wheelchair before. They also built a hospital in Gaza. This is some of their larger developmental work. They also sponsored, as I said, orphans and families, but they always gave to programs. They never gave money just like that. And these particular charitable societies that are being criminalized here, not in reality, are in fact, most of them zakat committees, which are, basically attached to a mosque, and people give money to the mosque, and then it's given to the very, very poor. It's a fundament of the Muslim religion. So these are some of the things they did, and a few projects that like electric generators they gave to Lebanon. I'm thinking of, they built a road to connect a village in the West Bank to the town. They paid for a school bus so that children could get to school and back home in the West Bank, just in this one little place. So they on the big level and the small, they were incredibly influential, and they were known as an American Muslim organization. So these are just some of the things that they did. So what happened is, when they were designated terrorist group, they sued Ashcroft. They sued the Justice Department, and ultimately, through a kind of legal sleight of hand, they ended up being redesignated, and really the courts deferred to the government. And the bar is much lower in terms of the standard of evidence. A lot of the evidence came from Israel, and it was pretty much, manufactured in some ways. And some of it was also classified, which again is similar to this case with the 6 groups that have been designated terrorists, because there's a, quote, secret dossier going around, which Israel has provided governments. So let's see. What happened next is they appealed the decision, and in 2004, indictments came down, and they were now being charged, and they arrested everybody, and 5 of them were actually prosecuted. 2 of them left the country before this happened. So there were 7 total, and the Holy Land Foundation itself was now being prosecuted. I want to read one quote. By the time the case actually went to trial was 2007, and the government no longer argued a direct link existed between the Holy Land Foundation and Hamas. The defendants, and I'm quoting a lawyer and writer named Emily Ratner, the defendants were charged only with providing humanitarian aid to Palestinian charities that the prosecution insisted were tied to Hamas, thereby helping Hamas win the hearts and minds of the Palestinian people. The charges themselves were conspiracy to provide and providing material support to these listed groups, these charitable groups. And I think one of the things that has to be said is that USAID, the US Agency for International Development, also gave to the very same charities. So we are talking about a selective prosecution. And so there were 2 trials. The first resulted in a mistrial. The second resulted in all guilty verdicts for the men, the 5 men, and up to 65-year sentences. I want to talk a little bit about the kinds of the witnesses. So there was the government presented, John Bryant was one, and another was the Consul General, Edward Amington, who was the Consul General to Jerusalem. And he was a really, really huge force in the first trial. He basically said, look, I was guided by, I had CIA briefings every morning. we were never told that those charitable associations or committees were Hamas. I visited them. I spoke Arabic. I met their boards. I knew them, and also, AID worked with them. So, and he was there partly to counter the prosecution's star witness, who was a pseudonym Avi. He was a guy from the Shin Bet, which, if anyone knows anything, I mean, this is like, a group that's known for lying, for secrecy, for killing, and for torturing Palestinians. It's a counterterrorism, division, basically of intelligence, is now in the courtroom testifying against 5 men of Palestinian origin. And he was allowed to testify anonymously, which meant, in essence, that the defendants could not confront their accuser, which is just a basic right. And the lawyers themselves couldn't, discredit him because they had looked into his background and could use his background. I mean, they could discredit him, but up to a point. And so by the time the second trial came around, there were many differences, but one of them was that Edward Abington was told by the CIA's counsel that he could no longer talk about anything in that was proprietary to the CIA. So, okay, where are they now? Can everyone see me? Hello?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Yeah, so where are they now? So two of the men are out of prison, but one of them is in an ICE detention center, and he's supposed to be deported. And one of them is having a very hard time getting a job, or just in general is kind of considered not just a felon, but also connected now to the word terrorism. So it's like this never ends, that's something that Asma Alashi said to me once, and it's true. And then 2 of them are serving 65-year sentences. They are Shukri Abu Bakr, who was the executive director and the CEO basically of the foundation, the face of the foundation, and Ghassan Alashi, who Asma's father, who is also serving a 65-year sentence. And the 5th one was just basically volunteering for the Holy Land Foundation in his own right. He was a civil engineer, Mufid Abdul Qadir, and belonged to a band. And so his name was he was dragged into this whole thing, and he will be released shortly. But all of these people have pretty much lost, their livelihoods, their reputations, everything. So I will stop here and yield to John Bryant.
Okay, let me introduce him. Thank you very much, Zia, for that informative presentation. Our next speaker is John Bryant. John Bryant has had a distinguished career of public service. After earning his undergraduate and law degrees from Southern Methodist University and becoming a lawyer, he served 9 years in the Texas House of Representatives and was twice named one of the 10 best legislators by Texas Monthly Magazine. Then he was elected as a Democrat to the U.S. House of Representatives from Texas, where he served for 14 years from 1983 to 1997. He sponsored more than 100 bills on such topics as limiting ads on children's television, saving America's forests, and requiring lobbyists to disclose their activities. He was appointed by President Clinton as U.S. ambassador in charge of U.S. telecommunications treaty negotiations in Geneva. This post took him throughout the world, negotiating international alliances. After completing his public service, he returned to law practice, business, and civic affairs in Dallas and Washington, D.C. He is past chairman of the World Affairs Council of Greater Dallas, chairman of the Lewis Psychiatric Research Foundation, and chief executive officer of Landing Point Telecommunications. It is my pleasure to present the Honorable John Bryant.
Well, thank you, Steve. I'm glad to be here and always glad to be part of a forum that highlights this tragic circumstance that is now part of our history and our present. I think I'd like to thank Ms. Jaffrey for a comprehensive account of the situation. My role in it began, actually, it might be said that it began when I was a member of Congress and I had offered amendments to cut aid to Israel by the amount of money they were spending on settlements in the West Bank, which were and continue to be illegal in terms of international law and were a violation of US policy. It was the first time that that issue had been raised in a legislative forum and actually voted upon. And when my career came to the end, when I left Congress after serving, well, first I left Congress and I went to did a treaty for the State Department, then I came back to Dallas. At that time, it was about 1998, I met Ghassan Elashi and Shukri Abu Bakr. I probably had met them before, but they came to me to ask my assistance now that I was in private law practice in determining the source of comments that were repeatedly attributed to unidentified sources in the State Department, the FBI, and other agencies that appeared periodically in news stories all through the 1990s, suggesting that the Holy Land Foundation was providing support to banned organizations like Hamas or the Kosovo Liberation Army, allegations that were quite easily shown to be false. I was also asked to get to the bottom of other abuses to which the Holy Land Foundation had continually been subjected, including, for example, the Immigration and Naturalization Services unannounced airport detention and immediate deportation of a group of renowned Muslim scholars who were arriving here to participate in an HLF forum. And so I set about to try to get to the bottom of this. And so from 1998 through early 2001, I met with the heads of key government agencies, including the State Department and the FBI, and even with the charge in the Israeli embassy, and explained that the work of the Holy Land Foundation stated its principal activity was raising money and wiring money, which is effectively all that it was doing, and conveyed its desire to be completely transparent, and pointed out that wiring funds abroad was already transparent to US and foreign intelligence agencies. So we could not figure out why these accusations, unattributed to any specific source, but attributed generally to a quote, anonymous source in the FBI or the State Department, continued to appear in print. I also pointed out to these leaders of these agencies that in 1995, would have been 3 years earlier, when Hamas had been added to the list of prohibited organizations by the Clinton administration, that the Holy Land Foundation leaders met with the Treasury Department regarding the Holy Land Foundation's charitable contributions in the West Bank, which consisted of wiring money to the local Zakat committees and charitable committees, the same Zakat committees to which USAID, that is the United States Agency for International Development, and the Red Cross provided funds routinely, because they knew that these Zakat committees knew the local needs and were not corrupt. And the HLF leaders were told at that time that since the Zakat committees were not on the list of prohibited organizations, they were not a concern to the US government, and the Holy Land Foundation had no need to be concerned about sending money to those committees as well. Even though everything that the Holy Land Foundation was doing was already transparent, I expressed on behalf of the Holy Land Foundation to these government agencies the foundation's willingness to modify its operations in any way that it might be requested in order to address any concern that any of the agencies might have. No agency ever offered any caution to me or any statement of concern about the Holy Land Foundation's operations. None of them ever asked that the operations be modified, even though we expressed a willingness to do so, in spite of the fact that all of the operations of the Holy Land Foundation were already transparent. Now, I would point out that I think it's quite noteworthy that at this time, the Holy Land Foundation, which was the largest Muslim foundation in the United States, was advertising heavily on television, radio, billboards, and even the sides of city buses, appealing for contributions to the HLF to help relieve the plight of Palestinians in the West Bank and refugee camps. This was the first time that the American people had regularly heard about the difficulties of the Palestinian people from a Palestinian point of view. Up until that time, the American people had never seen any kind of an advertising campaign that showed the Palestinian side of this long-standing dispute. In response, the Anti-Defamation League began conducting a drumbeat of attacks on the HLF, urging government officials and allies in the press and the public eye, such as the now discredited journalist Judith Miller, then of the New York Times, and Stephen Emerson, also a discredited anti-Muslim crusader, urging them to do the same, which they did. The New York Attorney General then began to initiate civil inquiries into the Holy Land Foundation's nonprofit status, and a number of members of Congress from New York made public statements about the HLF. But in spite of all of that, the Clinton administration, which we now know was monitoring the organization, in fact, had been wiretapping the Holy Land Foundation's communications for 8 years, never found any reason to take any action against the Holy Land Foundation. In 2001, George Bush became president. This is George W. Bush, the younger Bush. On September 11th, the attack on the World Trade Center occurred. Scrambling to look responsive and tough about something that had nothing whatsoever to do with anything involving Israel or the Palestinians, the Bush administration and Attorney General John Ashcroft ordered an FBI raid on the Holy Land Foundation offices, seized all its documents and equipment, froze its bank accounts, and shut the foundation down, designating it as a terrorist organization and alleging that it supported Hamas, for which there was no evidence whatsoever. As Ms. Jaffrey described, the HLF filed suit in Washington. I will not repeat the events that have already been described for us, but basically the HLF was not permitted any discovery, that is to say, any right to look behind these allegations and find out what evidence there might be to support them, and were provided only useless information such as third-hand hearsay reports, which were not the basis of its actions. The Bush administration claimed that it had secret information And as I said before, the federal court allowed no discovery, did not consider the evidence that the Holy Land Foundation submitted, and dismissed the Holy Land lawsuit. I would point out to you that its ruling stated that it was not to be used as precedent, that this is a one-time ruling, saying basically that, and I'm quoting this from the case, in a general case, perhaps the opportunity for discovery might have produced precisely that which was lacking. However, this is not a general case. This is a specific case involving sensitive issues of national security and foreign policy. And they issued a special ruling applying only to the Holy Land Foundation. It had been shut down and all its money and property confiscated, and it was not allowed a proper civil trial to contest that. As was recounted previously, 5 officials of the Holy Land Foundation were indicted in Dallas. And I don't think it's necessary to go back through that. But by that time, the claims of the government were much more limited, saying that, well, some of the Sukkot committees in the West Bank had members that were associated in some fashion with Hamas, and that they influenced the Sukkot committees. And therefore, the Holy Land Foundation was helping them win the hearts and the minds of the Palestinian people. It was a fatuous claim, so fatuous that even in the midst of anti-Muslim fervor of that time, the government failed to convict any defendant. But they did not give up. They were shocked and embarrassed and resolved to try these cases a second time. And they did try them a second time. The details of that have already been provided to you. I would add that there was a new judge, that the prosecutions hired a famous jury consultant to help them pick a jury, and that after another lengthy trial in this time around, having had the opportunity to learn from the first trial, in the second case, the prosecutors managed to achieve a conviction. I'm unable, I think, to express strongly enough that this is an enormous miscarriage of justice. It's a gross failure by our legal system. These men have served, those who are out, served lengthy prison sentences, disrupting their lives. Those who remain in prison are unlikely ever to get out during their lifetimes unless we're able to inspire special action by the president to grant them commutations, or perhaps even better. I would point out to you that this is a prosecution that was asked for and pushed by the Israeli government. If these men had been tried and convicted of exactly the same thing in Israel, they would have served from 6 months to no more than 4 years in prison. And yet, all the defendants under these highly irregular circumstances have had to serve much longer sentences, and those in prison, as I said before, have almost no prospect of getting out during their lifetimes. I'm glad to answer any questions when the time comes for questions, and I'm grateful to be included in this forum.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for those very valuable observations. Our final speaker is Asma Elashi. Asma Elashi is the daughter of Ghassan Elashi, one of the founders of the Holy Land Foundation, who is currently serving one of those 65-year sentences in federal prison. Asma currently lives in Dallas, Texas. She is the mother of 2. Asma.
Hello, thank you so much. JVP and for Zia and John for a really good overview of the trial. I want to mainly just put a human face to my dad. He's always referred to as one of the Holy Land Five. He is a loving father, husband, son, uncle, philanthropist, entrepreneur, and so much more. I just want to kind of, give you guys a little history of his background. He was actually born in Gaza to refugee, my grandma, who was actually raised in Jaffa, had a beautiful home. She always describes her home with orange groves, smells wonderful, overlooking the Mediterranean Sea. And when in 48, when the Israel was established, she was basically kicked out of her home to make way for European Zionist settlers. So she was sent to Gaza and eventually married my grandpa and had my dad, which is the eldest of 6 siblings. So he was raised in Gaza, didn't have an easy childhood because he was at a disadvantage in Gaza, went through boarding school. And because my grandpa really valued education, he sent him to Egypt to get his college degree. And then he did some study abroad in London, and then eventually made his way to America. So he came in the late 80s, pursued his master's in Miami, and then went to Jordan one spring, met my mom, and brought her to America. And that's how, they got their family started. And I'll never forget this because my mom always mentions it when she was a new bride, traveling to America for the first time. They were in the airplane and my dad told her, like, we're going to America now. Like, the very cliche, the land of the great, we're going to be able to practice our religion how we wish, not like in the Middle East. And we're going to be able to, have freedom of speech if you want to, say anything. We're not going to be imprisoned or, silenced. And so, yeah, it's very ironic, that years later, he is silenced and imprisoned. So we have a little surprise because my dad was able to say a statement, and he prepared a statement to kind of talk about why he even, had the inspiration to start the Holy Land Foundation. And also, with the potential it could have achieved if it was still open. So I'm going to share my screen, play his recording. It's about 5 minutes. You can hear him speak from him directly. And then I'll go on to share, where he currently is and, his current status. So let's see. I hope I'm able to. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay, so let me.
Okay. It has been over 20 years since the Holy Land Foundation for Relief and Development was shut down by a presidential executive order announced from the Rose Garden of the White House. Since its inception in 1989, the Holy Land Foundation has faced an onslaught by many pro-Zionist organizations in the US, including some members of Congress, in addition to the Israeli government. In 1992, the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, issued a report covering the HLF and other Muslim NGOs in the US. 12 years after that report was issued, the same report was used as a base of the criminal indictment of the US federal prosecutors, not a surprise. The HLF budget for 2001 was $13 million the year it was shut down, covering a wide span of relief and development work, such as orphans and needy family sponsorship, health services, student scholarship, Ramadan and Eid food packages, social services, educational services, including a children's library in Hebron, emergency relief for families who lost their homes and belongings as a result of the Israeli defense indiscriminate bombardment. Such relief and development work is in contrary to what the Zionist plan in Palestine of making life miserable for Palestinians. Just with the modest growth of 5% a year, the HLF could have raised in the last 20 years since its closure close to $500 million. The Israeli government and its supporters in the US knew the great potential of the positive impact the HLF would have had on using those $500 million on the life of the Palestinians in the occupied territories. The Zionist lobby not only used the political and the media pressure to stop the good work of the HLF, but were able to legislate new laws that enabled US federal prosecutors to criminalize the HLF charity work. The onslaught on Palestinian charities and human rights organizations never stopped. And here are some examples. Over 30 states has passed laws to civilly penalize any entity that support BDS, the Boycott, Divest, and Sanction movement. Pro-Zionist lawyers are filing civil lawsuits against several Palestinian organizations like AMP, American Muslims for Palestine, and Students for Justice in Palestine. Congress has passed laws such as Taylor Force Act that makes it impossible to reopen the Palestinian mission in Washington, D.C. We all know about the latest Israeli listing of 6 Palestinian NGOs as to
This call is from a federal prison.
Al-Haq, Adamir, Isan Center, Defense of Children International, Union of Agricultural Work, and Union of Palestinian Women. Even UNRWA, United Nations Relief Organization, is not spared from the attack, which until recently, US aid to it was cut to zero. What motivated me and my colleagues Suki Abu Bakr and Mohammed al-Mizayyin to start the HLF is what would have motivated nowadays a Ukrainian American watching the brutality of the Russian army, killing innocent civilians and destroying the economy of the people of Ukraine. Many charity projects and organizations sprang up in the last couple of months to provide aid to the people of Ukraine. And that's exactly what the HLF have done 20 years ago or 25 years ago to help the Palestinians. The challenges that face the Holy Land Foundation and currently facing all NGOs working for Palestine are a continuation of the Zionist movement goal to empty Palestine from its indigenous population. The steadfasting of the Palestinians by remaining in their land despite the brutality of the occupation forces has led to the creation of a reality, a new reality of the apartheid state. The latest reports by the Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem, the Human Rights Watch, and the Amnesty International are a testimony of this apartheid status. Me and my co-defendant has been in the US prison about 15 years. This imprisonment meant to be a punishment, but alhamdulillah, I have taken on myself the task of memorizing the Quran and keep a regular exercise regime. I have done my best to communicate with my wife, my 6 children, my mother, sister, and brother, my nieces and nephews, and my friends. The trial that I went through with my family strengthened my faith and made my children grow stronger and independent. The imprisonment was meant to be a punishment, but with the will of Allah, it made me and my family stronger. Thanks a lot for giving me the opportunity to share with you why the Holy Land Foundation started. Your event is a continuation of the struggle of the Palestinians for independence and dignity. Wassalamu alaikum.
Okay, that was very informative, and I was really glad that you guys were all able to, hear his perspective through him directly. I wanted to just quickly answer a few questions, that were asked to me to kind of, speak in this event. Is how did we deal with this, right, when it first came about? Like, it was a huge shock at first, and since we were a big family, it did tear us apart, and it was a lot of trauma to deal with it at a young age. My 3 younger brothers were just in elementary school when this all happened, so they essentially grew up without a father. And although it was hurtful to suddenly be demonized, right, and in the community especially, there were people that outcasted us, and that of course was very hurtful, and that would want to completely disassociate. But I am thankful, because I won't discredit the people that really stood beside us, because Dallas does have very genuine community at its core, and that we were supported because people actually knew that my father and the other men were seen as leaders in the community and were made examples, so that it could just add division and fear within our community. We used to have, talking about in the 90s and in the early 2000s, we used to have regular protests for Palestine. After 9/11, after their imprisonment, silence, nothing, everybody was fearful. And this is a common theme where, oppression and human rights violations are being, made. So I wanted to say that it really, just like my father said, like we found ways to cope, right? So my father found ways to cope quickly, even though he was very isolated and in a very unjust situation. He turned to his faith. So like he said, he memorized the Quran. He subscribed to countless magazines. As you could see, he's very well read, and not to mention all of his exercise, which keeps him going. For my family, my 5 siblings and I, of course, we all cope with it in different ways, but a common theme is that we just try to overcome the struggle by being resilient, pursuing higher education, and following successful career paths, which I'm very thankful for. Now, it's always a constant state of grief, because it's different from a passing away of a parent. It's just you're constantly grieving every day, and asking yourself, when will my father be free? The dreaded, oh, will he just never make it out of prison? And so that's a very haunting question. And that's why I'm very thankful for these events and the continued support because we've pretty much exhausted all the legal, avenues. And right now it is all about uniting collectively, raising awareness, and trying to start international campaigns, to make this frontline news and not like something that's just of the past. Lastly, I just wanted to kind of tell you guys his current status. So he's been in prisons all around the country, and he's currently in Pine Knot, Kentucky. I think one of the worst experiences, he was in something called Communication Management Unit. I just feel like everybody should know about this because it's terrible. It's in Illinois, and it's essentially a little prison within a big prison. And it's called the Little Guantanamo. And they put like basically 40 men, most of them high profile cases and Muslims. And they sprinkle a few, other people so they can make it seem like it's like, regular. And my father was in there for like 4 to 5 years. And it was very difficult because we would travel thousands of miles, get to this prison only to visit him behind plexiglass window through the phone in a very small room with no AC. And it's me and my 5 siblings and my mom. That was very painful. Currently, he's in Pine Knot, Kentucky. And this is a side note, but the prison industrial complex, it's a business essentially. So they place these prisons in the middle of nowhere. You have to drive a lot to get to them. And they're usually placed in low income communities so that they can boost the economy, give jobs, everybody there that's in that town working in the prison. So you finally get there, you feel like obviously you don't belong. And it just to set up the scene for you, you enter, and there's a little taped square on the floor. And you can only hug him within that little square in the beginning and in the end of the visit. Very humiliating. The rest of the visit, you cannot touch him. You have to be across from him, not next to him. So you just feel this very eerie, distant feeling. Of course, I'm thankful we get to see him. And the last time I've seen him was March 2020, right before COVID shut down. And my daughter was 2. Since then, she's now 4. I've had another child, which my father has never met. And that's a whole nother story, trying to explain to my kids that they can't see their grandfather, and where is even their grandfather, all of that stuff. So we've since then, spoken on the phone. We don't know when the visitations will be on again or issued again, just because they always remind us that it's a privilege, not a right. So they take their time with these things. And just to kind of focus on one last point is that as a Palestinian, like my father describes it, is no matter where you are in the world, you're going to have some sort of struggle. So it's an extension of what is happening in Palestine is happening now and they use the same exact tactics. So the cruel and unusual punishment. Just a few examples. Me and my sisters went to visit my dad one time, and I was pregnant with my first daughter. And they have faulty machines that test for if you've been in contact with drugs before you enter the prison. And they calibrated the machine to be hypersensitive when we arrived, because every other visitor did not receive a negative. And then when we came to test, we all received a positive. And we were told we need to leave the prison. We weren't going to visit my dad after traveling thousands of miles, spending thousands of dollars, hotel, rental car. So we had to go back to the hotel and just sit there in this small town with nothing and broken hopes that, you know, we wish that we could visit my father and see him and speak to him after not seeing him for more than a year prior. So things like that, just these same tactics that Israel does when you go and you visit, and then they don't allow you to come in, or they question you for hours, or they strip search you. All of these things are essentially a way to discourage you from continuing to speak the truth, from continuing to be connected to your family. And it's essentially a punishment, a mental punishment on my father, because they know that the only thing that keeps him
Asma, you've frozen on my screen.
Yeah, here also.
Yeah, mine too.
Okay, maybe we'll go on, and Asma will rejoin us when she can, but thank you so much, Asma, for those very moving words and for that powerful message from your father. So we're now up to the point where if people have questions, they can put it in the chat. We have time for just a few.
Sally asked, would that not be double jeopardy? Apply the ability to prosecution to learn more from a failed trial is a perfect rationale for not being able to retry a case?
Well, the answer is no. Had they been acquitted in the first trial, of course, it would be double jeopardy to try them a second time, but they were not acquitted. It was a mistrial. They could not, did not reach a verdict either way. The jury came to no conclusion. So the government was allowed to try them a second time.
Brian asked, what is something I can do about this case and bring it back to my comrades? Anyone?
Who are you? Okay. Sean, go ahead.
Well, I think our solution right now is only options are political solutions in which members of Congress are contacted and asked to weigh in with the President of the United States to commute the sentences of these men and let them out of prison. Or communicate with others, third parties who might be able to take up the cause as well. Again, had these prosecutions taken place in Israel, they would have been out of jail after a maximum of 4 years, maybe in as little as 6 months. So by any standard, these sentences are completely unjust. The convictions, of course, are completely unjust, but the sentences are barbaric.
Right. Can I add something there? We were going to put the petition in the chat, no?
Yes, I can do that now.
Yeah.
The petition links are in the chat. Steve, did you want to put them on your screen too?
Yes, I will put them on my screen.
And they're in the chat. And while he's doing that, yeah, whoops.
So this is a petition that appears on the Human Rights Watch website. And it's a joint statement by US and international civil and human rights organizations and individuals. You can add your name to that. And a second thing you can do, can you see that Betty McCollum page.
Mhm.
So Betty McCollum has introduced a resolution. So this doesn't deal with the Holy Land Foundation case itself. This deals with the Israeli decision to designate the 6 Palestinian NGOs as terrorist organizations. And so this is and if you go to this link, you can get the full background on her resolution. And you can urge your member of Congress to co-sponsor and support this. So that's a political action you can engage in because, as Representative Bryan said, it's going to take political pressure to change this. Doesn't seem like the legal system itself is any longer able to address this.
Right, good.
Okay, and I'll keep posting those at the top of the chat. Emily had a question. Are there people in the Clinton administration who are willing to come forward now and speak out about this that might have had a change of heart?
Yeah, that's a good question for John, actually.
Well, we were unable to find any. We spent, with the support of the Muslim Legal Fund, which spent a huge amount of money in 2016, helping us try to obtain commutations. We were unable to find anyone who would come forward and any new personalities to come forward and join our efforts.
Hi, everyone. I wanted to introduce myself. I am the new CEO of the Muslim Legal Fund of America. I'm 2 years into the CEOship and 4 years into the organization. And obviously the Holy Land Foundation is the reason that we were created. I just wanted to introduce myself today. I'm getting my head around it. Zia and I had a really great conversation last week, and I would love to meet with you also, John. There are people approaching me in different ways in which we can talk about the story, documentaries, and tell the story. So I'd love to just meet offline maybe and just, touch base to see what we can do collectively. And if I can use my platform to do more. I'm still very close with Charlie Swift is still with us. So this case is really close to us still. It's still in our radar. So maybe there's new ways, new brains, or new opportunities we can make good noise to create some sort of movement or attention. So I just wanted to say hello. Thank you for having this event. And I look forward to a continued conversation.
Yeah, I'm available anytime you want to discuss the matter.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I apologize. My internet went down at my house, but I was at the end of it, so.
Okay, your timing is perfect. Somebody asked a question. Is there something that could be done for your family right now? What would your family like?
Besides what John mentioned, which is the commutation of sentencing and presidential pardon, I don't think that any other avenue can be taken at this point. It's different in Palestine when they have like prisoner exchanges, releases, things of that sort, but that doesn't apply here. So those are the only two like avenues we could take at this point. We've tried like the commutation of sentence and for him to be deported to Turkey when Obama was in office. And unfortunately that did not work. So we're trying again with Biden, but that's not very likely, so.
Okay, Steve Shalom, it's 8:15.
Your clock is faster than mine. I think we've got 4 more minutes. And so if there's anybody else who has a question, you can get your last question in. So Yoshi has a question. Has compassionate release been tried as a legal option,
Actually,
which has gained traction because of COVID?
yeah, actually, me and a colleague were talking about that. We wanted to try to see if we could do compassionate release, especially because the judge that was in our trial actually passed away in 2001, which was Jorge Solis. He was our judge. So we're trying to see if we could do something like that actually, and get, a judge that wouldn't be worried about the other judge since he's no longer, passed away. So we're looking into that.
Okay, so it's now 8:13, so I think this is the time to thank our speakers for their wonderfully informative and moving presentations. And I hope as many of you as possible can take advantage of some of the limited ways we've suggested that you might be able to involve yourself in this. Thank you very much. And thank you to the audience for your participation.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.